In a world where love is often seen as unshakable, a single impulsive decision can unravel even the strongest of bonds. Meet Emily, a 32-year-old marketing executive who once believed her life with Liam, her 35-year-old husband and a software engineer, was as close to perfect as it could get. But one fateful night, a moment of recklessness tore apart the foundation of their 7-year marriage, setting Emily on a tumultuous journey of love, heartbreak, and self-discovery. A night that changed everything. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Emily's trembling hands clutched her phone. Her world unraveled in mere seconds as Paul's mocking tone echoed through the speaker. "Your little secret won't stay hidden for long," he sneered, his words laced with venom. On the other end of the line, there was only stunned silence. Liam, her devoted husband, was rendered speechless. The laughter in Paul's voice felt like shards of glass piercing through Emily's heart, each one a painful reminder of the irrevocable damage she had caused. "I didn't know how to fix it," Emily whispers, her voice filled with regret. "And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if I even could." As she speaks, her words draw listeners into her whirlwind of regret, disbelief, and heartbreak. Questions emerge like storm clouds. Who is Paul? Why would he do this? And can Liam ever forgive Emily for this betrayal? A love that once was. Emily takes a deep breath, rewinding the clock to the early days of her relationship with Liam. A soft smile flickers across her lips. "We met at a mutual friend's wedding," she says, her voice filled with nostalgia. "He was charming, attentive, and had this ability to make me feel like the only person in the room." Their love story began like a fairy tale. Spontaneous road trips, midnight conversations that stretched until dawn, and plans for a future brimming with hope. But as she recounts these golden memories, her tone shifts. "Looking back, I wonder if it was too perfect," Emily confesses, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. The cracks begin to show. Over time, the couple's idyllic romance began to change. Liam's career as a driven software engineer demanded longer hours, leaving him preoccupied with deadlines and projects. Emily, navigating her own demanding marketing career, found herself longing for the emotional connection they once shared. "I felt like I was losing him," she admits. The passionate love they had nurtured was slowly replaced by routine. Polite exchanges over dinner became the norm, intimacy gave way to indifference, and the laughter that once filled their home grew scarce. "It wasn't that he didn't care," Emily explains, defending Liam. "It just felt like I wasn't his priority anymore." The weight of loneliness. As months turned into years, the emotional distance between them widened. Liam's long hours at the office became even longer. Even when he was home, his mind seemed miles away, tethered to his phone or consumed by thoughts of work. "I would sit across from him at the dinner table, trying to share my day," Emily recalls. "And he'd nod absent-mindedly while scrolling through his phone. It was like I wasn't even there." Her loneliness deepened when conversations about starting a family were met with indifference. "I wanted kids," she confesses, her voice tinged with sadness. "But every time I brought it up, he'd say it wasn't the right time. There was always another excuse." The once shared dream of building a family began to feel like a distant fantasy, just like the connection they once cherished. The breaking point. Friday night. Another argument. Another empty promise. Emily's resolve cracked under the weight of her unmet needs and unspoken desires. Desperate for an escape from the suffocating loneliness, she made a choice that would alter the course of their lives forever. "I just wanted to get out of the house," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. What began as an impulsive attempt to feel seen and valued spiraled into something far darker, an affair that would ultimately shatter her marriage. As Emily recounts her story, her words paint a vivid picture of love lost, choices made in the heat of desperation, and the heart-wrenching consequences of betrayal. The questions that remain. Can Liam find it in his heart to forgive? Will Emily's journey of self-discovery lead her to redemption, or is the damage too great to repair? Emily's story is a powerful reminder that even the strongest relationships can falter when cracks are left unaddressed. It's a tale of love, loss, and the courage it takes to face the consequences of our actions. Emily stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her favorite outfit, a dress that once made her feel vibrant and alive. Tonight, she hoped it might help her feel like herself again. The solitude of her home had become suffocating, and the distant hum of a nightclub offered a stark, almost desperate escape. Alone, she ventured into the dimly lit venue, the pounding bass a sharp contrast to the silence she had grown accustomed to. At the bar, she met Paul. He wasn't the kind of man who immediately turned heads, a confident man in his late 30s with an easy smile, but there was something disarming about the way he noticed her. Paul struck up a conversation, his voice smooth and engaging, and before long, Emily found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she hadn't spoken aloud in months. He listened, she later confessed, her voice heavy with guilt. He asked her about her life, her struggles, her dreams. Questions no one, not even Liam, her husband, had bothered to ask in a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt seen. As the night deepened, Paul's empathy became a balm for her wounded heart. When he invited her back to his apartment, she hesitated, the weight of her conscience battling the need for connection. "I knew it was wrong," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I told myself it was just one night. I was so desperate to feel something, anything again." What followed was a whirlwind of emotions, a blur of fleeting comfort and overwhelming guilt. As she sat on Paul's couch, their conversation took a subtle, unmistakable turn. He leaned in, and Emily didn't stop him. "I should have," she whispered, her regret palpable. But in that moment, all the loneliness, all the rejection, it just melted away. The encounter was both intoxicating and shattering. Lying awake in the early hours, she stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with regret. "I wanted to leave," she said, "but my legs wouldn't move." Morning arrived too soon, bringing with it a suffocating wave of remorse. Quietly, Emily began gathering her things, hoping to leave the mistake behind and bury it forever. But Paul had other plans. As she reached for her phone on the table, Paul picked it up before she could stop him. "What are you doing?" she demanded, panic rising in her chest. With a smirk, Paul dialed Liam. Emily's heart sank as she tried to grab the phone, but Paul brushed her off, holding it out of reach. "Hey man," Paul began, his tone dripping with mockery. "Just thought you should know, your wife spent the night here." Emily froze, horror washing over her as Paul recounted their night together in cruel, unnecessary detail. "Stop it," she pleaded, her voice cracking. But Paul ignored her, relishing the chaos he was causing. Liam's silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and when Paul finally tossed the phone back to Emily, the smirk on his face felt like a dagger. Tears streamed down her face as she fled Paul's apartment, the weight of what had happened pressing down on her chest. Back home, the silence was unbearable. Her mind raced as she imagined Liam's reaction. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. No scenario seemed survivable. "I thought about running," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "About leaving before he came home. But deep down, I knew I couldn't avoid what was coming." The night stretched on, the tension unbearable as Emily waited for the inevitable confrontation. What would Liam say? Could he forgive her? Could she forgive herself? The air was heavy with questions, the answers teetering just out of reach. Emily's world hung in fragile balance, the line between hope and despair growing thinner with every passing second. A few days later, Emily and Liam hosted a dinner party at their home, a regular gathering meant to strengthen camaraderie among Liam's team. Despite the lively chatter and warm smiles exchanged that evening, Emily was on edge. Since the fateful phone call, she had barely managed to look Liam in the eye, let alone summon the courage to bring up what had happened. "I didn't know how to tell him," she admitted later, her voice tinged with regret. But no amount of preparation could have readied her for the shock awaiting her that night. As the guests trickled in, Emily froze. Standing casually in the doorway, exchanging pleasantries with Liam, was Paul, the man she never thought she'd see again. Her one-night mistake wasn't a stranger after all. He was a senior member of Liam's team. "I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room," Emily recalled, her hands trembling as she recounted the moment. Paul, however, appeared entirely unfazed, smiling warmly as he shook Liam's hand, his demeanor so unnervingly normal it sent chills down Emily's spine. Her mind raced with questions. Did Liam know? Was this some cruel game? What was Paul doing here? Throughout the evening, Emily avoided Paul's gaze, her pulse pounding in her ears as she braced for the worst. Yet, Paul seemed to thrive on the tension. He shared stories, cracked jokes, and participated in lively discussions as though nothing had ever happened. Every time he laughed, I felt the walls closing in, Emily confessed. The dinner felt interminable, a cruel test of her composure as guilt gnawed at her. But the worst was yet to come. That night, lying awake beside Liam, Emily realized she couldn't keep her secret any longer. "The guilt was eating me alive," she said. The next morning, she mustered every ounce of courage she had and sat Liam down. The truth spilled out in broken, trembling fragments. The nightclub, the phone call, Paul. "I was shaking so hard, I couldn't even look at him," Emily admitted. Liam's reaction was immediate. Shock, then a wave of fury. "You did what?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. Emily flinched as she recalled his anger, her voice faltering with emotion. "I've never seen him that furious," she whispered. But as his rage subsided, it was the hurt in his words that cut the deepest. "Was I not enough for you?" Liam asked, his voice heavy with despair. Emily tried to explain how lonely and neglected she had felt, but every word seemed hollow. "I never meant to hurt you," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. But Liam didn't respond. He stood up and left the room, leaving Emily alone with her spiraling regret. The fallout from her confession was swift and devastating. At work, Liam confronted Paul in a tense exchange that nearly erupted into violence. "You've crossed the line," Liam told him coldly. Paul, ever smug, shrugged it off. "It wasn't my marriage to protect," he replied, his indifference stoking Liam's fury. The tension spilled over into Liam's professional life, isolating him from his once close colleagues. Some sympathized with him, others deemed the confrontation unprofessional. At home, Liam withdrew completely, spending nights at the office or crashing on the couch. "Every time I tried to talk to him, he'd walk away or tell me he needed space," Emily recalled, her voice heavy with despair. In a desperate bid to salvage what was left of their marriage, Liam suggested counseling. Emily, though terrified it was too late, reluctantly agreed. The first session was an excruciating ordeal. "It was awkward, painful, and unbearably raw," Emily said. The therapist encouraged them to speak openly, and an avalanche of emotions followed. Liam admitted he had felt unappreciated and overwhelmed, consumed by the pressures of his career. "I was trying to build us a better future," he said, his voice breaking. Emily, in turn, confessed how deeply his emotional absence had hurt her, leaving her vulnerable to a mistake she would regret forever. "It felt like we were unpacking years of bottled-up pain," Emily explained. For the first time, they began to see the cracks that had formed long before her betrayal, the ways they had both neglected their relationship. Yet despite moments of clarity, the road to reconciliation was uncertain. "Some days, it felt like we were making progress," Emily said. "Other days, it felt like we were just tearing each other apart." Liam's trust had been shattered, and Emily knew rebuilding it would be an uphill battle, if it was even possible. As she reflected on their journey, Emily's voice softened. "I don't know what the future holds for us," she said, "but I've learned that love isn't enough on its own. It takes effort, communication, and understanding." Looking directly into the camera, her gaze steady but filled with vulnerability, she added, "If my story resonates with you, I hope it makes you think about the choices you make, and the consequences they can bring."